G.I. Joe, G.I. Joe, fighting man from head to toe, on the land, on the sea, in the air.
Someone's coming, Chewie. Who's there? It's Princess Leia and Luke Skywalker. Now I know the Force is with us.
The Superpose, the arch enemies of the superheroes.
Action figures. What do you think when you hear those words? It's a word much like superpowers or superheroes. The word invokes different things to different people. You can think of big army soldiers, comic book heroes, muscle space gods, and maybe even science fiction aliens. Action figures might be different things to different people, but let's take a look at the history of action figures. In 1964, Hasbro coined the term action figures to market their G.I. Joe Figures for Boys line. At this time, any toys of this style was labeled doll, such as Mattel's Barbie doll. However, Hasbro feared that boys wouldn't want to buy anything labeled as doll, so they came up with the new term action figure, a term that sounds a lot more manlier than doll. G.I. Joe was a military-themed 11.5-inch figure idea by Stan Weston. Stan Weston was a New Yorker and former Korean War vet who was a licensed agent who oversaw branding for Supercells and Twiggy during the 1960s. After visiting Army surplus stores in New York City, Stan came up with a plan for a military toy line that would become known as G.I. Joe. Stan licensed his military doll to Hasbro for $100,000. Although Hasbro came up with the term action figure, they did not trademark the name. However, they did trademark America's movable figure, which appeared on every G.I. Joe figure box at the time. G.I. Joe was a huge hit, and this spawned other toy companies to cash in on the action figure market. In 1965, Roscoe released their action figure line with the Johnny Hero line, but they chose to use the term boy doll rather than go with action figure. With the success of G.I. Joe, the action figure was born, and with it, not just the name, but the look. Action figures for the most part in the 1960s were between 11 to 13 inches, changeable clothes, and military heroes.
Man and Robin, the dynamic duo. Superman, the Man of Steel. Aquaman, the famous undersea crime fighter.
That was until Mego decided to shake things up a bit when they got the toy rights to DC Comics and Marvel Comics in 1972. They decided to take the action figure scale down to 8 inches, but still keep the doll-like look. The line would be called the world's greatest superheroes, and finally, G.I. Joe had competition.
Mego presents the Planet of the Apes action figures.
Mego didn't stop with superheroes, as they turned their plans to something unheard of at the time: movie tie-in toys. Mego saw the box office success of Planet of the Apes as more than just a flash in the pan. With a sequel already lined up, Mego knew this was a market just waiting to be tapped. In 1974, they released their Planet of the Apes action figure line, keeping them scaled down to 8 inches like the superheroes line. Mego, however, failed to get the legal rights to use Planet of the Apes star Charlton Heston's likeness for a Taylor action figure. Therefore, Mego released the Astronaut action figure with a generic mold looking nothing like Charlton Heston. Mego didn't stop with one movie tie-in. Also that same year, they got the rights to the movie classic Wizard of Oz, Tarzan, and TV shows such as Happy Days, Our Gang, The Waltons, and a failed 3-season TV show that was now a huge hit in syndication.
Mego presents the Star Trek action figures featuring the crew of the Enterprise.
Mego was able to buy the rights for the Star Trek action figure line for only $5,000. That $5,000 investment would end up making Mego over $50 million by the end of his Star Trek run. No one but Mego saw the need for TV and movie-based action figures. With the Star Trek line, again Mego kept the action figure line to 8 inches. To Mego, this was the best size for kids' small hands and made them perfect for kid play. Along with the action figure, Mego was able to make playsets to give the action figures more to do than just jump off the kid's bed. However, the 12-inch doll size wasn't dead yet. and it was being kept very much alive thanks to a small toy company in Cincinnati, Ohio, who was also getting into the TV tie-in toy business. Kenner Products were founded in 1946 by brothers Albert, Philip, and Joseph Steiner. Kenner got its name from the street where the original office was located in Cincinnati, Ohio. In the early 60s, Kenner found success with their glider and panel building set and the Easy Bake Oven.
It's Kenner. It's fun.
The company was bought out by General Mills in 1967. Kenner was now able to bring more to his ever-growing list of toys by adding Play-Doh and more.
Steve Austin, astronaut, a man barely alive.
Gentlemen, we can rebuild him. We have the technology. We have the capability to make the world's first bionic man.
In 1975, Kenner took a page out of Mego's playbook and bought the license for the hit television show $6 Million Man. The show was already into its second season and was a favorite with kids. Keeping with the Hasbro's G.I. Joe line, Kenner kept the $6 Million Man action figures closer to doll size. A little bigger than the 11-inch G.I. Joe, these stood 13 inches. The doll size, be it 8 inches or 13 inches, was the standard size. But that was all about to change, as things were about to get a whole lot smaller.
空を見ろ、鳥だ、飛行機だ、あ、ミクロンだ。
弾よりも速く、力は機関車よりも強く。
In 1976, Mego licensed Microman action figures from Takara, who had a huge success with the line in Japan since 1974, and rebranded it Micronauts. With a gas crisis causing production costs to skyrocket, Mego kept the Microman line Micro.
This is the world of the Micronauts, a Croyer, the enemy, and the Micronaut Space Warriors, all sold separately. Space Glider, Galactic Warrior, Time Traveler.
The 8-inch superhero was no longer the smallest guys on the toy shelves. Micronauts were 3.75 inches tall. The cloth clothes needed for the large size action figures was also cut out to save cost. These were smaller, cheaper, and just as fun. The line became yet another huge hit, earning the company $3 million. Mego was the driving force for boy toys in the mid-70s. However, a new force was about to change action figures forever. As Mego's Martin Abrams was hammering out the deal to bring Micronauts to the U.S., his brother David Abrams was rejecting a license deal between Lucasfilms for an upcoming science fiction film that seemed right for the toy business, called Star Wars. David Abrams felt that Mego would go bankrupt if it was to make toys based on every flash-in-the-pan science fiction B-movie that came along. After being turned down by Mego, Lucasfilm set its sights on Kenner, who bought the rights for a one-time flat fee of $100,000. However, the film was set to open in 1977, and it would take Kenner more than a year to get figures produced, shipped, marketed, and in stores. This could really hurt the success of the toy line, as most movies at this time would be long forgotten within a few months of its release. The film opened in May of 1977, and it grew and grew all summer. Adults loved it, but better for Kenner, the kids loved it. To say Star Wars was a successful film is an understatement. It was a culture shift. Not only can he talk about the movie business before and after Star Wars, there's also the toy business before and after Star Wars.
The attitude we're taking in our planning is that George Lucas has created this marvelous fantasy world, peopled by all kinds of droids and exciting creatures, and we think that it could be another Disney. Maybe 50 years from now, they'll be celebrating R2-D2's 50th anniversary.
Demand for Star Wars merchandise was high, and Kenner needed to be ready for Christmas of 1977. It released a few board games, puzzles, and more, but it needed action figures. Kenner had already decided to use the success of the Micronauts 3.75 scale for their Star Wars figures. This would be best to make ships and playsets for the action figures to play in. However, Kenner did keep the old large doll size figures around also in a separate large size action figure line. As the Christmas season got closer and closer, it was clear Kenner couldn't have action figures on the shelves. So they did the next best thing. They released an almost empty box with the promise of 4 Star Wars action figures mailed to kids as soon as they were produced. In early 1978, Kenner Star Wars action figures finally hit kids' hands and toy stores, and like the film, it forever changed pop culture. By the end of 1978, Kenner has sold over 4 million Star Wars action figures, making the company over $100 million.
But Cincinnati-based Kenner Corporation sales are up 40%. And Kenner officials say the movie Star Wars is responsible. Last year, Kenner won the rights to manufacture toys based on the movie, paying millions in royalties. But Kenner says it'll pay off. They've shipped over 30 million Star Wars toys this season, and they're firmly convinced the craze could last for years.
However, not all things Star Wars was a success. The 12-inch large-size action figure line, which was a few years ago the action figure standard, failed to sell and was soon canceled. This brought an end to the era of doll-size, large action figures. With the release of Kenner's Star Wars action figures, the action figure market changed almost overnight. Action figures were shrunken down. The doll size was no longer what kids wanted and almost seemed out of date. Within 5 years of Kenner's Star Wars release, the toy powerhouse Mego that launched the success of movie and TV tie-ins filed bankruptcy as it was unable to stay above the water as Star Wars demanded the toy business. In the wake of Star Wars action figures, even G.I. Joe had to scale himself down to 3 inches to compete.
We're off on a sales odyssey that exceeds a bounty hunter's dream. Zeroing in on your market like Han headed for Cloud City.
As the 70s came to a close, the landscape of action figures had changed, from how they were played with and to their size. Pushed to the back burner was the doll-sized figures that was once the standard of toy companies, with such lines as Mego's Superheroes and Mattel's G.I. Joe. Now, thanks to the success of Star Wars, figures were mostly scaled down to a better hand size, which allowed to have more play value and able to play with playsets and ships. Not only did Star Wars help bring in a new scale of action figures, it also brought in the 80s boom of movie and TV tie-in toys.
From the Black Hole Collection, it's Vincent.
Look, a black hole in space.
Mego, the company that turned down Star Wars, was now seeing its sales fall sharply and not wanting to make the same mistake they made in the 70s, was now trying to pay catch up and buying the license to everything they could get their hands on in hopes of the next Star Wars. They got the license for the Black Hole, Buck Rogers, Chips, Dallas, Doctor Who in the UK, Dukes of Hazzard, The Greatest American Hero, and lots more. Their next gamble to find the next Star Wars by buying up any license they could didn't pay off. By 1981, Mego reported losing over $4 million in sales and started to lay off staff in early 1982. And by that summer, the company filed bankruptcy. The once action figure powerhouse of the 70s was now closing down. Kenner, who had the rights to Star Wars, was by far the force of the action figure market, thanks to Star Wars alone. As its sequels, The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, kept kids playing with Star Wars, it also brought in a lot of new fans to help figure sales.
Indy, over here. Indiana Jones, at your service, Toad. Ah!
However, Kenner was struggling with their other non-Star Wars action figure lines, such as their failed Indiana Jones line and the planned Alien line that never got off the ground after poor sales of its Alien figure. Fearing they might become the Star Wars toy company, Kenner knew it needed more than just Star Wars toys to stay a force in the toy market. With Kenner out looking for the next big thing, Mattel Toys had found it.
Who's the big guy with the muscles?
He's He-Man, the most powerful man in the universe.
Their 1982 He-Man Masters of the Universe line was the action figure line taking the bite out of Kenner's hold on the action figure market with their Star Wars line. As most companies were trying to compete with the look of Star Wars, Mattel decided to jump up the scale to 5.5 inches, and they also found a way to cut costs by giving most figures the same body and mold. Rather than try to get the next big thing, Mattel did something different. It made its own next big thing.
I am Adam, Prince of Eternia and defender of the secrets of Castle Grayskull. This is Cringer, my fearless friend.
Mattel would help boost the toy sales by having its own Masters of the Universe cartoon and comic book series. The plan was paying off, and for the first time in 5 years, a toy line was outselling Star Wars. With He-Man growing in the toy aisles, and George Lucas saying the latest Star Wars film would be the last, at least for the foreseeable future, Kenner knew it had to do something, or it would lose to Mattel for sure. Kenner and the DC Comic Company struck a deal when Kenner licensed the DC comic book heroes Superman, Batman, and more for their Superpowers collection in 1984. The figures were 3.75 inches and had an action feature to give them more play value. Taking a note from Mattel's Masters of the Universe collection, DC released a Superpowers comic book series, and Hanna-Barbera released 2 Superpowers-related cartoons, Super Friends, the legendary Superpowers show, and the Superpowers team. He-Man was about to have strong competition from a group of superheroes that had been around for 2 decades. However, Hasbro was starting to gain ground with an old friend. In 1982, Hasbro relaunched the G.I. Joe action figure line. They scaled down G.I. Joe from his doll-like size to the more familiar Star Wars size of 3.75 inches. Taking the size from Kenner, they also took an idea from Mego's Micronauts by giving the figure more articulation, something the Star Wars figures were lacking. Hasbro also took a page from Mattel's He-Man playbook by releasing a G.I. Joe animated series and an ongoing comic book line. G.I. Joe was back, smaller but stronger than ever.
G.I. Joe against Cobra and Destro, fighting to save the day.
The Millennium Falcon spaceship sells for $34.97. The Jedi characters, the figures, sell for $2.68. Some of the toys are action toys. If your child gets one, you may have to take it away with force.
With no films in the planning, and the success of Mattel's Masters of the Universe collection and Hasbro's G.I. Joe, Star Wars was starting to decline in sales, and younger kids were seeing Star Wars toys as toys their older brother played with. There was a lot more choices in the toy marketplace of 1985, and kids wanted to play with toys that they were currently seeing on television or reading in the comics. In 1985, Kenner pulled the plug on what was once the powerhouse of Kenner, and it moved its focus away from Star Wars to the Superpowers line. By this time, the directions on how to have a successful action figure line was written on the wall. It wasn't about movie tie-ins. It was having its own tie-ins, cartoon series, and comic book lines. Instead of going out to try to find the next big thing, toy companies were making the next big thing. Toy companies like LJN got the rights to make figures based on the Thundercats cartoon, as Kenner got the rights to make toys based on the real Ghostbusters cartoon. Almost every cartoon series, no matter how big or small, seemed to have their own action figure line. As kids were reenacting out episodes of their favorite cartoon with their action figure, Hasbro was about to change the landscape with a whole different type of action figure. Getting the US rights from the transforming toys from Takara, Hasbro launched the Transformers. These were surely not the action figures your brother played with. These gave a whole new meaning to the word action in action figures. The toys themselves could change from a vehicle, a device, or an animal into a robot action figure. It was like getting 3 toys in one, a robot, a vehicle, and a puzzle. Like most toys at the time, a Transformer comic book and cartoon series would air as the figures reached the stores. However, Hasbro took it a step further in 1986 with the release of the Transformer animated movie.
Transformers, the movie. Coming to a theater near you this August.
The action figure market was no longer being dominated by one or two action figure lines.
Sometime in the not-too-distant future, it's talking and electronic Robocop. Hands up!
There was almost an action figure line for every cartoon series kids were watching. As the 1980s were coming to a close, it was clear the big toy companies had found out how to succeed in the action figure market. Hasbro, Mattel, and Kenner all had successful action figure lines that were helped with a comic book series and a cartoon series. However, a small toy company was watching and taking note. Apes Toys saw a small comic book series becoming a cult hit and insisted that a toy cartoon series be produced based on the comic book series Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. This cartoon series was unlike the He-Man superpowers or real Ghostbusters. This cartoon series was smartly written and humor that wasn't aimed just for small kids, but for an older crowd that was growing out of the more kiddie-type cartoons. With the cartoon series being a hit, in 1988, Playmates released the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle action figures. And with it, they discovered something the big companies hadn't. There was a marketplace buying action figures who were not 11-year-old boys.
We're buying Star Wars toys.
Right. In a couple of years, they'll be worth a lot of dough. Like a lot of other things.
You're buying them strictly as an investment.
Yes.
And as the 80s came to an end, the collector's action figure boom of the 90s began.
Hey, Junkman channel popping though.
Thank you, sir, for that unsolicited testimony.